weather here is sunny and in the 70s. Tonight, my guest is Victor Furman, and before we get to him, I want to thank some of our sponsors, Rolling Hills Asylum, Fort William Henry, and you can find them at dpmwickedradio.com. Hi, Victor. How are you?
Wonderful, Tammy. How are you this evening?
Good. Now, Victor, you do a lot of things, so tell us about what you do. Tell our listeners what you do.
Well, Tammy, I'm like a juggler. I have about 30 things that I keep floating in the air at any given time. My normal day job, my career is I work in the welding and industrial supply industry. I've been doing that since 1979. And I'm involved in sales management and sales administration, and that gives me an opportunity to do a lot of traveling to visit customers and help design systems for joining metal, for cutting metal to pieces, and all sorts of things of that nature. And that's my day job. But my real calling, my avocation, my night job, so to speak, has been in the world of the spiritual and the metaphysical for many, many years. And my story starts back when I was a kid. Back in the 50s, and I had a grandfather who was a bit of a mystic and a spiritualist himself, and he was considerably older. I was very young. My mother was younger than my father, so my grandfather. My father's father was much older when I was young. He was well into his 80s when I was like 5 and 6 years old. But he didn't look at me as a child. He looked at me as a contemporary, as a peer, because he knew when he looked at me that he saw something inside of me that would be someone who would be a student to him, that he would mentor me and start opening my eyes to the fact that it's not just the physical aspects of this world that we live in, that there's much more to it. When I was 7 years old, I was in my parents' apartment in New York here, and in my room, and all of a sudden, before me, my grandfather appeared. And he smiled, and he seemed solid as if he was actually standing there, and smiled at me for a couple of seconds, and then slowly he dissolved and disappeared. And I went into the living room, and I said to my mother and father, I said, Grandpa was just here. And they said, you're imagining things again. I was one of those kids who was labeled with an overactive imagination, which we understand later on when we're in the world. Work that we do is not an overactive imagination. It's seeing and experiencing things that many people don't. And then even a couple of minutes later, the phone rang. That was my grandmother saying that my grandfather had just passed. So that was my first conscious experience of the disincarnate, of the human soul and spirit as the body dies. And I actually had a lot of other experiences prior to that, but this was the first one that I could actually define as my awareness and knowledge of seeing spirit, of seeing the disincarnate, the energy that remains after the body ceases to exist, which is my belief. And my belief system is that, number one, it's not a belief. It's physically proven that everything in the universe is energy. And the energy of who we are, the essence of who we are, the personality, the soul, whatever word you want to use to describe it, and it's been described in virtually every language and every culture and every faith system around the world since the beginning of time, that essence, when the body dies, when the carbon-based container ceases to exist, what happens to that energy? And science, physics tells us energy can either be created or destroyed. It changes from form to form. So when the body dies, what happens to the energy that is the essence of us, the spirit, the soul, the pneuma, the ama, whatever you want to call it, that essence, the soul, the spirit, where does it go? Well, I can't tell you exactly where it goes, and I don't know that I'll be able to answer that question until I actually go there myself. But sometimes that essence, the spirit, hangs around in and around the physical plane that we inhabit. And that is what most people refer to as ghosts or as disembodied spirit. And so in any event, that was my first experience. I grew up. I became very scientific in my education, very practical. My spiritual side sort of was quelled in my teens, and in my early 20s, I was in the United States Air Force. I was around the world in various cultures and situations, and strangely enough, I was serving as a military broadcaster doing news, radio and television news for Armed Forces Radio and TV, and in particular for 2 years in Korea, a year on Guam, and other places that I traveled to. And sort of that's where the radio and television and the voice, Chris George, my partner on Inside Radio, dubbed me the voice. And that's where the voice sort of found itself, although for me the voice means something else, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. And then I got out of the Air Force, got into this business. I've been in this industry, the one that I mentioned is my day job since 1979, a long time. And in my late 30s, early 40s, the spiritual aspect of me started reawakening. And in the late 1980s, I started facilitating meditation. I started, people loved my voice and found out my voice was soothing and healing, and asked me to start leading meditations. And I joined a group of people, and we would go to these retreats at this Buddhist monastery up in Livingston Manor, New York, and we'd go every couple of months, and I would start facilitating these meditations. And at one of these meditations, somebody mentioned the word Reiki. Now, I had never heard the word Reiki consciously in this lifetime, but there was something about the word that resonated with me. And I said, what is Reiki? And they said, it's a form of energy healing, spiritual healing. I said, how do we find out more? And they said, well, there's this teacher in New York that has classes and so on and so forth. And there were three of us who were really interested, but it was the kind of thing, this was October, and we said, well, that's something we'll look at, in a year, next year, whatever it might be. And 2 weeks later, literally 2 weeks to the date after that conversation, we all started in our first Reiki class, and that was 1987. And so the Reiki became the reignition for me of the spiritual path. It sort of reopened me and excited me, and was the spiritual accelerant that got me started again. Went on to Reiki 1, and for those who don't know, Reiki is a form of energy healing, traced back in its current incarnation to Japan in the late 1800s, brought to the United States after World War II by a American woman of Japanese descent, Mrs. Hawaii Takata, who brought it here to the United States and basically founded what is modern Reiki today. But it was also predicated on 2,000-year-old Buddhist scrolls and teachings that were rediscovered by this Dr. Sui in Japan, and so the legend goes in the late 1800s. Anyway, so I started practicing Reiki, and that, as I said, was a spiritual accelerant. And in those days, in the late 80s, early 90s, Reiki involved laying out of hands. It can involve non-contact, but for the most part, laying out of hands. And in those days, if you wanted to go into a hospital and perform laying out of hands, you either had to do one of two things. You either had to be ordained in a faith in which the laying out of hands was considered a sacrament, or you had to be a licensed massage therapist. And obviously, to become a licensed massage therapist here in the state of New York was a 2.5-year commitment. It was a lot of money. And I thought about becoming ordained. Now, a lot of my friends were doing these, in those days, this was before the Internet, and they were doing these mail-order ordinations where you wrote a one-page letter why you wanted to be ordained, you sent $50. And a couple of weeks later, you got your certificate of ordination. And for me, that wasn't enough. I'm the kind of person that when I delve into something, I want to fully immerse myself in it. This mail-order ordination wasn't for me. So come the mid-'90s, and I hear about this thing called the New Seminary of New York. And a friend of mine suggested it. And I said, what is this about? And they said, what this is there are people who get some type of spiritual calling later in life, be it the healing aspect, as I was involved in, or other things, and they want to become ordained. And it's not just an ordination process. It was a 2-year school, kind of like a seminary night school and weekend school, where you would attend these classes here in New York. And it included comparative religion. So you studied every major religion in the world. It included all of the aspects of spiritual ceremony and ministry. It included spiritual counseling. It included it was almost like going to a true seminary, except that, like I said, it was done on a night and weekend basis. It was a 2-year program. And I graduated and was ordained in November of 1997. And my initial thought was, well, I'm doing this because I want to have the ability to go into hospitals and do healing and laying on of hands. But it became so much more, and it really became the second level of spiritual accelerant for me. Reiki was number one, and this ordination program in the New Seminary of New York was number two. And my life really changed after that. I can't begin to tell you about the synchronicities and the wonderful things that have happened since that time. There's been a myriad of experiences. One of those experiences was actually getting involved in paranormal investigation. And I'd always been in contact with spirit. I'd been a spirit communicator for a long time on a personal level. And the other thing that I was doing also was I was working with people in hospice who were in the last stages of life and helping them and their families prepare for transition and helping them to softly cross and successfully cross and to diminish the suffering and the mourning of the family by doing that. It was a wonderful process. It was actually, I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunity to be of service in that way, and I continue to be in service of that to the dying and their families. But then something else happened. I had a chance to meet a gentleman here in New York who had a paranormal organization called Paranormal NYC, which was the first paranormal investigation group formed in New York City long before those hunters and the popularity of this stuff happened.
Right.
And I got together with this group and became a member, and I'm now co-director of Paranormal NYC. And we don't do public investigations. We strictly work with families, private individuals, who feel they have some type of paranormal activity in and around their home. And what we find is 97% of the time, there's nothing paranormal. That it's something to do with emotion, it's something to do with environment, it's something to do with the structure of the home, whatever it might be. And just to give you a quick example, we got a call from a gentleman in Brooklyn, New York, who said that he would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and there would be this horrific face staring right at him, and he would scream and it would go away. And he said this would happen every night and just would shake him out of sleep. He couldn't go back to sleep, and it was torturing him. And so we went to his house, and the first thing that we noticed was that there were half-drunk wine bottles throughout the house. So that's what it was as the possible situation there. The other thing we noticed was that the floor, this was an older house in Brooklyn, and some of the foundations are not the greatest, and the floor was actually thick. So if you were standing on one side of the room, you'd be falling forward, and if you're standing on the other side of the room, you sort of would be at the bottom of an incline. And it wasn't a significant incline, but enough that if you were sensitive, if your balance was sensitive, it would make you feel off balance. So you had a couple of things going on there. The third thing that we noticed is that he had an iPod dock, and it was not an Apple brand, it was an off-brand iPod dock, next to his bed, right next to where his head would be, where he sleeps. And as you know, and anyone who's a professional paranormal investigator knows, that different types of devices give off what's known as EMF, or electromagnetic fields.
Right.
And that normal background fields, for example, a clock, radio might give off 1. An appliance might give off 1.5 to 2, and I'm talking about milligauss right now. Well, this iPod dock, when we put our EMF meter next to it, pegged at 100%, which means it was putting out a tremendous magnetic field. And as we know, intense magnetic fields can do a number of things. It can cause paranoia. It can cause insomnia. It can cause itchy skin for people who are sensitive to high magnetic fields, and a number of things. And obviously, it can create hallucinations. Well, we determined that was the real culprit there. And we instructed the gentleman to remove it from his bedroom, put it someplace else in the house, not to drink as much wine as he was drinking. He'd do it on weekends or occasionally every night. And from that point forward, he had no problem. And again, this is part of that 97% of the investigations that I've been involved in all the things that I've been involved in, where there is some type of non-paranormal explanation for what's going on. And the goal of Paranormal NYC, the motto of Paranormal NYC, is that we are there to help the living. And it's really what it's about. It's about reassuring people that they can live comfortable in their homes, that there's nothing negative or haunting in their home if there's none, and to make sure that once we do the investigation, that we bring them satisfaction. If we don't, we work with them until they are comfortable and satisfied in their home. That's our goal. If in fact we do find something paranormal, we approach it very professionally. And my aspect of the team is I'm the spirit counselor, not the spiritual counselor, but the spirit counselor. And my goal, my objective is that if there is a spirit present, if it's remaining there for whatever reason it might be remaining there, is that I talk it over and talk it into whatever people want to perceive as the light, the next existence, the next realm, whatever people see it as, next dimension. But I help the spirit to leave the premises peacefully, lovingly, and with a lot of respect. And that's one thing, when you listen to Chris and I on our show, Insight, and also to Vision Quest on BTM, Chris is a lot more vocal about this. I'm not as vocal. I'm a little quieter about it. But one of my biggest concerns is when so-called paranormal teams go in.
Okay.
When I say so-called, they see ghost hunters, or they see some of these shows on TV or Paranormal State or whatever it might be, and they say, we're ghost hunters, and they go out, they buy the equipment, and they don't really have any type of training, they don't have any interpersonal people skills, and it's all about finding the haunting, finding the ghost, finding the demon, so to speak, or whatever it might be. And it's really not about taking care of people, and that really is a major pet peeve of mine. It's not more word than it's really, I'm disgusted by it. And the other thing that disgusts me is people who do what they call provoking. When someone's in spirit, this was a formerly living human being. Now, I'm not talking about non-human, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But if someone has passed, they were once living flesh people. And how would you like it as a living person if someone came up to you and chastised you and threatened you and provoked you? You wouldn't like it at all. Well, in spirit, when we're in spirit, it's the same thing. The same rules apply. You would never, my opinion and the rules that every team that I've ever worked with go by is that you talk to a spirit with the same respect and dignity that you would talk to if they were standing there in the flesh in front of you at that time. And I can't tell you how strongly I emphasize this on anything that I've worked on. So in any event, Paranormal NYC is my primary team. I've been a guest investigator. I've been a guest investigator with Eastern Suffolk Paranormal, with the Northwestern Queens Paranormal, and a number of groups. And about 3 years ago, I met a guy by the name of Chris George, psychic medium Chris George, on an investigation here in the city. And he and I became instant friends, and we've been working together ever since. And I've been a member of his Second Sight team, and also he asked me about a year and a half ago to be his co-host on Second Sight Radio and later Vision Quest on BTM. And we have two wonderful radio shows that we partner on, and I'm very happy to do that. So now let's talk a little bit about some of the other stuff. So we talked about the 97% being non-paranormal. Well, what about the 5% that are paranormal? We do have spirits. We do have this energy, this essence of the person who was formerly alive, who is still hanging around for whatever reason, and there's a million reasons. A lot of it has to do with people not knowing that they've transitioned. People who die suddenly by accident is one case. The other case, and I'll get arguments about this, but I know it to be true, is unfinished business. You're a person who's loved your family, and in the process of transitioning, you feel as if you're leaving them unprotected with unanswered questions and this type of thing. So you hang around. You hang around and sort of look at them. A lot of people talk about their spirit guides, and a lot of spirit guides are actually members of the family in the past and hang around to help. So that's the formerly human, disincarnate spirit. Now, demons. Here's my next bugaboo. My next gripe. Okay, you watch shows like Paranormal State. You watch shows like some of the other programs, and every week there's a demon. It's a non-human entity. It's this, that's the other thing. In all of the years, I've been doing this stuff for more than 20 years. In 20 years, I've encountered 2 energy forms that I would consider to be not formally human, not disincarnate human spirit. I don't know where they come from. They're not energy forms in the sense of demons as described in the Judeo-Christian tradition. But the sense is that they're powerful energies, and they were never incarnate as human beings. There's a lot of theories as to where these beings come from. But like I said, in 20 years of doing this, and I'm going to guess probably 1,000 investigations, I've only encountered this twice.
Mm-hmm. I have been in spirit since I was 5, and I only encountered a couple. Whatever they are, non-human. Rest are, if there is paranormal activity, the rest are just normal, spirits that lived and died. So.
Absolutely. And then, then Chris, one of the services that Chris offers, which I had not offered prior to meeting with him, is what he refers to as an exorcism. And in the case of Chris's exorcisms, only once did we deal with a non-human entity. The remainder of them have been people who had been nasty in life and who decided to hang around, and sometimes the soul doesn't rectify right away, or the spirit doesn't rectify right away. And when I say rectify, good and bad are judgments. It's the judgment of the human being, what's good and what's bad. But people who are basically nasty in life sometimes are nasty when they transition until their spirit soul energy gets straightened out. When I say rectifying and straightening out. And that's the majority of what Chris and I encounter when he has to do the removal of an attachment. And the word exorcism has that demonic implication, but we're not talking about demons 99.9% of the time. We're talking about spirit attachment, where a formerly living human being hangs on to a living human being for whatever reason and interferes with their life and interferes with their comfort. And that's what Chris specializes in, and I learned to assist him on that, and actually have started doing a lot of work with him on that. And that's also really good. And again, this is for private individuals. This is not something that's done as part of a public investigation, public experience. A couple of interesting things that have happened to me over the last 3 or 4 years in doing this work is in the process of me channeling, bringing through disembodied spirit, disincarnate spirit, I've had a few photos taken of me where my face has morphed. And everything around me is crystal clear. The picture is sharp. And only my face appears to have morphed. And I'm not talking about like light or interference. I'm actually talking about a change in the shape of my face. And in one example, Chris and I did a work with a family out in Staten Island, New York. And I brought through the woman in this house. I brought through her father. And as I was bringing through her father, a couple of pictures of my face were taken, and it was obviously not my face. But my body, no question about my body, that wasn't my face. And these are with conventional digital cameras, nothing special. And when the woman looked at the picture, she gasped, and she said, "That was my father's face." So, and the message that I was bringing through for her father was that he had left the family when they were very young, and he was asking her for forgiveness, and she was able to express her forgiveness to him, and it brought a sense of peace and a calming to the whole situation between her and obviously her father's spirit was able to leave after that. And that's the kind of work I really enjoy doing. That's the soul work that I do, is really connection and peace between the living and those who are formerly living and are now on the other side.
That is awesome. Now, where can people find you if they need help in the New York City area?
Well, if they want to just connect with me for any reason, just communicate or talk or whatever it is, I have a fan page on Facebook. It's Victor the Voice Furman, Fuhrman, psychic medium Chris George. If they would like an investigation in New York City proper, they can go to the website Paranormal NYC, and they're in paranormal.nyc. I'm sorry, paranormal-nyc.com, and there are links to connect with us there. And that's really the best way. And the one thing I would ask, if anyone thinks that they actually have some type of a haunting or a spirit present, do a little pre-work yourself. And just start looking around and seeing if there's anything unusual in your house. We get a lot of calls from people with electrical problems. And it's funny, I have a background in electricity, as does Dom Valella, who's my partner on Paranormal NYC. And the first thing that we do is we check for ungrounded circuits. We check for electrical leaks. We had a situation out in Long Island where this woman said her children were having terrible nightmares and seeing things that they say they saw and so on. And we found that directly behind the bedroom or the bed where these children would sleep was an electrical circuit that was ungrounded, and it was putting out tremendous amounts of EMF. And I actually went out to a local electrical supply store. I bought cable, I bought some connectors, I grounded the outlet, and that stopped all the problems. So, paranormal investigator / electrician. A lot of stuff can be determined and solved with very, very common practical answers. So, if you think you have something going on, number one, 99.999%, it's not a demon, and 97% it's not paranormal. It's probably something else. And a lot recently that we found has been emotional. We actually get calls from people who want to do an investigation, and we do a lot of pre-screening by phone. But sometimes the pre-screening isn't 100% effective. And we get there, and it turns out they're just lonely people. They want someone to visit them, and that's really what it's about.
And, I have a degree in social work, and sometimes you have to be a social worker to these people.
Absolutely. And one of the things we do is we have referrals. And if we have someone who seems to have a psychological issue, we will give them a referral. If we think that they have some type of a physical issue, we'll give them a medical referral. If it's something of the spiritual nature, I will do spiritual counseling for them. But again, a spiritual counselor, and even an ordained minister, trained in counseling, I'm not an MSW, so I will not take on that type of work, but I will refer them to the proper people for that and give them the referral. And the final message is follow through. If you're going to call yourself a paranormal investigator and you're going to do it professionally and completely, have the courtesy of following through. Don't create things that don't exist to aggrandize yourself with the client. Just bring the truth, bring them the answers, and help them find peace and happiness in their homes.
Exactly. We're almost out of time, so I want to thank you for coming on, and I want to thank our listeners for listening, and go check out Victor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Tammy. This was a delight.
And I'll see you at the Paracon.
Absolutely. The Paracon, Finger Lakes at the end of the month. That's right.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Any clear?